I'm glad that we'll get to continue our discussion today about evolution and sleep.
Some of the delays to people
And okay, I was just seeing if folks are coming in. But I think what we'll do first is just connect back to yesterday for a little bit, just so that we sort of know the highlights from what we talked about yesterday, and then we'll connect those up with our topics for today.
The tampon as a case and carry you, shaman delista, the instatic chilanga to limit to the chickens, so the Casan de la Tagway, and Casanga soon the Trisha duty down the Terango Parola, Perseverant and Jogana Ruchi to the Muzona chickens.
So I think we sort of left off yesterday with Gaelic sharing one of his main takeaways, being that we saw these differences in sleep time, maybe when there was a community with electricity as compared with a community that didn't have electricity.
The Casan is not so good. Dom Javi Capsuro, Casan Zandananida, you don't get you courage to songs at the Kistambalaya. Any that lawyer knew courage Diana lawman knew courage parola tava bana posula ni query doing like a capra Kasuchitum do say take you for like it's.
And I know I had asked you all to choose one takeaway, but I actually wrote down two for myself that I'll share with you.
That Chesula in Bana Tindo da Carsugre to Nintendo that Toto can't you draw Chilapsa use. When an Arang de la Nitrisa used the Kari Metanum
And this is a slide from yesterday, but the first takeaway here is a reminder for us that we looked at some data, we looked at some graphs that show that humans are sleeping less than other primates.
The case on the tribute cups in the and the Turju Kachtan, they she shapa in Bina, they to room such a shen on Turbaina, meet in Twal and Nugget.
We have also started talking about that there are some costs and also some benefits potentially to sleeping less.
Nahanda, Tim saying so new one year by Natilla, any gentle, any keeping Nigayo, but is.
For the cost, and this is what we're going to spend some more time talking about today, but one of the potential costs is that by sleeping less, maybe humans are more susceptible to Alzheimer's disease.
That the cups in China cost less, your cost less that the Chendore, the cups that's media, any go new one year, but they like that go much table, but this Jungar is an Tilatin the Chichina, Melaya, and a assignment native Nayagi, and Yanka Choyo, which is.
And as you all mentioned yesterday, there's some potential benefits as well. And these include the idea sort of safety. If we are awake more, then we're able to be more aware of our surroundings and react to them.
Keeping catchers, keeping cats, Jizu Kachimutuana, Chingasu danger terrace, danger, say the Nesusu, Koitan, Nibabla, Nechihaku by Netilas, Tilas and Nejitan Susugi. And
we also talked about the social benefits of being awake longer, and this would give us more time, things that you mentioned, such as maybe doing some work and gathering food, and also just being able to interact with other people and learn from them.
Nature Nina Kubatilla de Tenga, so you say we get in ring or what is the Milan Drewache, Nichi Milan Drewache, and Samala Sopa Sudripia, Tina Shingi, and Mita Dendricia, Tamit and Dendrichola, and Kususania, Shisha Sapa, Janayagi, Kukapina Raviris.
So yesterday, we mostly focused on the first observation that humans are sleeping less than other primates. Today, we're going to spend more time actually talking about Alzheimer's disease and the biology of Alzheimer's disease.
다 계산하고 가리다레스나 지미디 아니 고 두름 소저신 당들바이나 니 디스뇨아 니기요 바틸라타이레스 다 디랭아 쪽에 가리타긴스나 아니 아니 디가사 나쪽에 디 사이멀 네기 아니 무가림바다 아니 디기 지미기 랑징기 테니시바네 치추카리오메서 데시자긴스.
And I'm going to start with introducing what I'm guessing is probably a new term, and it was a new term for me, which is why I'm also guessing it's probably generally a new term. And this is something called the glymphatic system.
다 디랑 아주 사와즈 모토치긴스 츠페치 사와인데 나랑 전화양 츠 사와차르도스 니 모토치 츠디카린스는 제추 말로사디인스.
And so before we talk too much about the glymphatic system, I'll have a sort of discussion prompt for you all. And that is just to talk with each other about what do you know about the lymphatic system? And for this, if you like, you're also welcome to look at any past resources. You can look at the resource website. But the idea is just to gather some ideas about what is the lymphatic system.
다 단단한 속에 디 제추 말라세 디고 무트마치 내라야 니치츠 난코니 지 드르지에다 지 텔라코 급치인스와 니 가리라야 드르지로지스나 lymphatic systems 나 아주 추서 말라지와 추서 말라세 디 아니 드르지로지스 다 드르지에데 치츠 간데나나 디그레스 치츠와 모방아 수주샤지 다양나 로테 탄타 치츠라 카리 이차 카나 로치요 파나 아틸라타데티 아니 추서말라세 티게 아니 치치다 티 젤레라 소바카리 치카소 마마치 나치 드드치로치스.
So you can go ahead, talk with each other, and this is sort of a review from year 4 of our biology curriculum.
근데 조가 속에 노름 시바게 진의 생리기 다 절정도 지레스.
We'll take another minute or two to discuss, and then I'll ask for a few volunteers to share what you talked about.
tanda karmachinis nala ni tado 드드치로치스 니 티체라니 치츠고네 당랑 치치미 카치게 가리 드드치멘데 아무튼 나오시스.
Give us some. Again, again.
Ale dawa danda di insare nganzo karsa uresena leba nalo tsada de zo baru le ya tene kenik dawo tene chunju tene sabi na de zo zangma so ke mala dawo chi koge sare mengo mala da dewa de medo
Yeah. He says it's probably lymphatic system is related to our immune system. It he meant, for instance, maybe like if there's some kind of residues, foreign bodies, brain or between the nerve cells, probably the lymphatic system helps to remove that from our body.
Okay, yeah, that's good. And yeah, let's try to hear at least one more idea as well.
La.
Atanda di mangche do gonda nganzu tsina gula ngi kugurwa ngi kuwe kapsu eni kogi lega de cho chigi se ta di kapsu imaina nda nganzu leba da ta di bo wangza porula changma so ya chi nganzu khamba changma so ya gitu je gonda tsina gula ngi kuwe kapsu chigi se res kogi chele cho de
Also, thanks it does the cleaning in our brain and within our nervous system, but it does the job, or it functions during nighttime when we go to sleep.
Okay, and so this sounds like this might even be getting into the specialized glymphatic system, which we'll talk a little bit more about now. All right, so thank you for briefly discussing the lymphatic system. It's a good idea to do the review of the whole lymphatic system. Before now, we're going to focus in specifically on this part that's the glymphatic system. So, as we mentioned, this is a specialized part of the lymphatic system. And in particular, this is the part that's channeling the brain fluid into the main lymphatic system in the rest of the body. And so sort of the big important thing to remember with this is whenever we're talking about the glymphatic system, that means it's specifically related to the brain rather than any of the rest of the parts of the body. And here we have a little bit of a picture to give us a visual of this. And what we see here is, well, a few things. And so what we see here is the first thing is how close the lymph vessels are to these blood capillaries. And in this case, we can see this is one similarity between the circulatory system and this lymphatic system. And that's because they're both moving fluids throughout the body.
That the training also with Kuchumal Kuchumala data, Nichusamalan Cheparugi, Timbigi, Kimchigris, the Nichaimbaina, Kachiris, Nanga Suzupuna Laya, Shirkuti Ondenchigris.
And this is meant to be a picture of the lymphatic system. So in thinking of the glymphatic system, that would be sort of other vessels here that are bringing the fluid from the brain here into the main lymphatic system.
That the thing at super time, but then I should take a race and Chusurgamala, Chusig to one. That and also get Jerchumala said the Kapsim by now, ne Tanda the Perganala Tamapachi, the Perganala you chugi, Chusig starting now, any lepin and issue put on Denji. That's what it is.
So these are just a couple of additional main points and reminders. The first two we've already talked about. Lymphatic system is a specialized part of the lymphatic system, and it specifically is moving the brain fluid into the main body.
That they Jesu Malakoge and Neton Kachiche, and the Tampo, knitting a sungotachi, Sra Tampo de Galena, Jesu Malo said, the Chusamala Cheli, Changi, Cheshim Bata, Nakulika, so the Lepanamero, Chusser, the piggy Shekuti, and Chusamalaganalaya, and they only chigres.
And so Wong did mention, I think, sort of the idea that there's a little bit of, we have this movement, and sometimes we think of it as a little bit of like cleaning out or clearing out some things that might accumulate in that space.
That day, I saw some understand degrees, Nestine ko Karsagreta, Shirku Chutango Palaya, some of the degree, meaning as Sugayanchi Karsagreta, Tandas Hanitela, Yopi, Shirkuchi, that Shirkunat, Samazugupa, some of the degrees.
So in the big picture, there are lots of different biomolecules that could be transported out of the brain by the glymphatic system. And even within these, so we have all the biomolecules, and then we have proteins. And what we're going to focus on now is just one specific protein called amyloid beta. And so, yes, the third point here is saying that the glymphatic system transports amyloid beta out of the brain. And with the final point that's on here, we finally see this connection between all of these things, between the glymphatic system and sleep and amyloid beta. And here we see that the rate of amyloid beta transportation out of the brain is actually doubled during sleep. Amyloid beta on the chair and research or research and need double. So we are going to talk a little bit more about the background information related to amyloid beta. Amyloid beta and and I guess I will also mention, so we're getting into now a very specific topic. We are now talking about just one specific protein, and this is just quite common in any scientific publications that everyone gets super specific and is studying, maybe only one protein or maybe even just part of one protein.
Ahanda danda de kapsung aso ko tridir chia gi joshi de ha chan chetak ba chikung wala le de yeswa chetak ba tizig na ni trizi chetak ba amyloid beta se ti ko la ya amuto chi restang aso ge tizig na ni ta chitang digi kar song gore se na chi gi takshi shimji chi bi ge kapsu ani chi ta cheta mukse da cheta chi la ya takshi chi ge yo ba de ani char ke shimji na na chi ha chan yong chib do chi reswa danda de kapsu la par de 아니 가서 지지치라야 신지치데 다치 콜라야 체토고니다 코미세긴데 시치고레 삼삼라야 니 지지치게 그런 게 차시치고 콜라야 지금부터 제도 시비제 비나야 그랬어.
And in this case, we are able to actually see this image of amyloid beta. And on the top part of it, so right here, this is showing a microscope image of what amyloid beta can sometimes look like.
한다 다다디 가레스나 가서 가라 요베게 땅라 요베게 모데 바이나 가레스나 아니 amyloid beta 디 참참라이고 아니 가서 타동 지시고 올라타스 담발라 간단도 치는 게 요미지레스.
And something that is interesting about amyloid beta is that it's able to be there in different forms.
Da gola amyloid beta satella chichiyo pate koran enchi namba tmagani edit chris.
And so this particular form that we're looking at right now is called diffuse. And when we're saying diffuse, we can see it's a little bit sort of spread out, that we just kind of we can see the amyloid beta in a lot of different places in this image.
Da de kapsa korangi chitam tontila yang asu chamje sigris da chamje se te kapsa da chaba dan jeba chabde parwa kutam de pala kuris da danga super gata bai bana amyloid beta korang de ani chi kasako khathur de bai ngola yures.
And something that's going to be important to keep in mind as we talk about amyloid beta and the amount of sleep in Alzheimer's disease is that this diffuse form is actually not associated with degenerating neurons.
Da danga suge amyloid beta ta ani da Alzheimer gi ne ko decision korwa ni da de kapsa amyloid beta ti tanda ko gi chamje gi ngola yo pa khatam de pi ngola yo pa na de nga suge ani wangsa nyam chin tang de yo mares.
And similarly, it's not associated with Alzheimer's disease.
Teta chisong ne ani ko Alzheimer ne ta ya de yo mares.
And now, before we look at a different form of amyloid beta, I'm going to talk a little bit about this image that's here at the bottom.
Tako amyloid beta ko la ya mitete chita ju ma ngoto ma chi ngela ya ni tande ge pershi o ma tinana yo pati ko la ya ngoto tis chi chi.
So the main point from this picture that's at the bottom is it's sort of a drawing that is intended to show these different forms of amyloid beta.
Hata de ko remote ba kan shila ko so de ka resena amyloid beta ki kurang geta chi taptang chi warwa taptang ko ge data number oti kan do mu chi pati tang yo res.
You can see some of these pieces they're drawn in sort of this blue color. And then just there's a different one here that's in red.
Taman chishiro dena khachi ko remote stambala ya ane chanchang hombona tri patan de na ne tanda kima de la ya ne chi yute ko marpuna tri to.
So it will be helpful to keep in mind when I go to the next slide, sort of you can do a little comparison in your head of this drawing to what we'll see on the next slide. So on this slide, we've been talking about the diffuse amyloid beta. And now let's take a look at these amyloid beta plaques. So with this one, you can imagine if you're looking through a microscope and you see this, it looks pretty different from the image that we saw on the last slide.
다다다기 티 값은 속에 트레이닝 세티 값다 바이바나 가리오레스나 자통 지시고 올라요 거기 넘버로 가는 중도에 다 바이바나 나수고 per 응마딜라 통바데 단단데 디스 카카레도.
And you can see even in this, the drawing version of the image, you can see this looks really different too. So even the blue ones are arranged differently. And then we see a lot more of the red and it's all sort of clumped together.
다다다디 값이 바나 거기 올라야 리모트 차주데 타바이바나 거기 ngombuti ta data ta ane tigi kimala yu chuga marpu yo pa chigorwa data yang per ngoma data this per ngoma data mandawa danda de kapsa chama chig nyam te dodo chin du de judo chuga ngoma nambala dus.
For these plaques, these are associated with degenerating neurons and they're associated with Alzheimer's disease.
다다다기 amyloid beta de danda tani ke nambala yo parwa panchun disen du yina yo paimana ane de wansa nyam chun tang do yo reda ane Alzheimer gi ne tan do yo res.
And so this is something that's usually really important to think about in scientific experiments, because in this particular case, what we're seeing now is it's the same protein. We have the same protein, amyloid beta, in both of these cases, but depending on the form, whether it's diffuse or as a plaque, that is actually what's important for the disease.
다다다 de kapse te imbana ga so seri dan ta shi kapse ke chimbu shu chi chago res danda de ga so ge disease res disease kan chi res chi kai res ne amyloid beta set zindiris imbana ko ge ching du tang ga nambala tin de tang ro ko du tang ga nambala tin de ne singa so ge chamjing wo yo patang chi tani ko wo la yo pa de la tin de ro ani chi ke ga so la da chamjing wo yo pa de ge chun chi go ma wa tani ke ngula yoba degi ane ngasula ne wansa nyamchen to ne saimagnet chegi yores de kurani ge disease pare da imba na yang ku ge namba ton kopa mandola tene de yang ko shooting mando chegi yores.
All right, so I now have an experimental design question for you all.
Nahanda danda chitsula ngaso takshe gi chi godi che tan de bitwa chis.
So what I'm going to do, I'm going to describe to you a potential experiment I have planned, and then I would like for you all to discuss, is that a good plan for the experiment, and is there anything missing?
Da danda ngaran ge takshe gi chi chango ge che shi chi du su moto chi yin swa ani ti moto chi kapsen che su ge kare ta ro chi sana ko ya go de me de ta takshe ge che shi de ya go de me de so
let's say that there is a person and I am trying to test if they might be at risk for having Alzheimer's. And my plan is that I want to measure the amount of amyloid beta.
Niku kola ya tan sameg nati jonjiran jonji marese ya ki poti natati jongre jong marese te kola ya taksiche ins ta taksiche ba na ne chershidi karin sena ane korang mite iz pugang la yobege amyloid beta gi tanga chigarwa te kasu chingdu se te la ya ane te tanga te tagins tanga te ta taksiche te kasu chingdu te tagins.
So go ahead, take a few minutes. You can discuss, is this a good experiment? Not a good experiment? Am I missing anything? Yeah, you can just kind of think, what would you do if you need to do this experiment? How would you recommend doing it?
ane keti cherang la ya takseti tribiyagi ko kechire baina cherang ge takseti kanaro chi dubsares.
whenever we're ready, we can hear from someone, but if the discussion's going well, that's totally fine. We do have time. I built in some good time for discussion this session.
왜? 고늘.
고도.
근데 안수 저거니. 소은들 단디 잠질라 되더니 저니라 되니 소디니 단다 체세로 언제지라. 체세로 언제지를 니캅데라티 아니 되게 전제됐다고라. 전지라. 야치 되니 소니 정거다니 딜라니 터신로 지나디 아 디노나 칼라 그러디 이문 선돼야디라 선돼야디 또 디게 잡견로 이제 디도 아니 디노 작반로 더서디 고발라니 터신로지
I mean, we discussed that we need to test on the protein amyloid beta, especially on the forms, on the structures, if they are in a diffuse form or like you need to test on that to see if it, yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, I think that's a start. And so there's a lot of possibilities with this. So I would like to hear from more of you. If you can new ideas, or we can build off of this one. If you have thoughts on how could we test that? How could we test these different forms or these different structures?
현재 지금 만들어 된다서 제스트랑 가서요. 실제로 디캅스 연구 그게 넘버 만들어 된다요. 어떻게 같을 때 시간을 놓치고 메티야 다는 그 레슨이 현재 지금 선지가서
등에 주시셔라. 드네 땅아저 단다데 딱지 제단데 지난 에멀레 베터데니 장망영게니 또 스케치들에면도 다고 아니 딜라 단다 알제머기 나서 요메데 에멀레 베터데 장망영게 게체 멤버지 코랑이가 아니 가르잖아 에멀레 베터데고 캡들데 도데요이나 아니 코디 나차데 아니 시라 되어메아체 다니 코 에멀레 베터데 다니 쿵이 뒤데요이나 아니 가르잖아 알제머기 나차디아니 가르스는 코다 포데요디 데워르스 디스팅도 아니 지다 아니 장망인기 고니 아니 딱제디 야부 말에 쉬어야지.
The test to check on the amount of amyloid beta is not a good test because the diffuse form is not related to the Alzheimer's disease. Only the plaque form or the condensed form is related or associated with the Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah, that's great, and I think that's a very like clear response, right? No, it was not. It would not be a good experimental design, the one that I had suggested.
Yeah, 가수 쇼시도 스나랑만 거래 다시 제고지셔디 지셔지들 야고도에서 계절 야고 리듬도 스티타타 되게 문두세요. 카리카트 페드 카세오건 선선 스페 야고도스.
Yeah, and so I think that's also related to the idea.
One more response.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Robsumba.
Nazudi tanda digarres na te karse emolia digarse bidena chilaudwa. Odi musi gi taga nazaji kosi yemba in nazase na karena ko depse ora. Mazu tanda di tsinu gi jamji jeni nisa ji kawa ye yuna nisa di gun khori dil tani ani ka naza mesa ina da musimba lo ta jeni loba ya tindi jeni ko gun khori di chijo kanda do koni ani dani yu jebr chi yu saresra yona tada ngazu di chibi di ina ta jingu chibi dolo chibi sen ani kasakala yora teno ji chi tanda dio 아니 거기 님에 요소 바래 아니 짐발이 아니 더지우사래 소소지도
Mhm. As my understanding, we have like a TB, tuberculosis. We have tuberculosis of the lung, and also they talk about the brain tuberculosis, TB. And like this, maybe we can just um, we can compare someone else's like the amount of amyloid beta with someone who has the disease or who hasn't. We can compare with the other to see if that person you are doing the test has the risk of having the disease in the future.
Okay. Yeah, so I think this is an interesting idea, like thinking about connections between different diseases. And this actually, I don't know about if there's any connections with tuberculosis, but I think this is an interesting idea.
That is just an example. That is just
Okay.
an example. Yeah, he says like there's a different type of tuberculosis. So what he's mentioning is that you can compare someone's amount of the result of someone's amyloid beta with someone else's who has the disease or who doesn't. So with that we can come to a conclusion if that person will have the disease in the future or not. So yeah.
I see. Okay, so this is talking about like a comparative study.
Yes, comparative. Yes.
Okay, yeah, and so this is really good usually for like establishing some kind of baseline, because there is some amount of the protein that would just be normal to have. So I do think this is a really good point to see like what, just to have that comparison so that we can see, oh, maybe this is just the amount that everyone has. So there's no reason to be concerned in that case. Yeah.
Tandati yagodus tandati rochi cheba imbana mission that the duruchi choro at the cheba imbana as the capsicarchi resena that baselines ne jipich or jitita nyongtana for that nyongtana dinero yon dinero chio by mana strigit the amyloid beta ticket translate strigit dinero chio by mana nits hamala dinero chio yepadores that dinero chimbana nasandela yachi 전치 사마리에 사야겠다. 아주 진전 사기지 핀도 치고와 어디나도 못해 샤사게 나발아요. 그 야고도 스타팅 반나 단다데고 조데 담미젠다 단두르데다. 그 메탄젠다 네탄 치바틴다게다 망부치토냐도 두르데다. 그 가수를 제트 직단의 배치고와 어떻게 네탄도 차도스.
And so before we move on to the next topic, I do actually still want to talk a little bit more about the idea that was mentioned that we would need to test for differences in the form or the structure of this protein.
당아 좀 맞으냐라 양이 근데 단다 지지게 그거만으로 니시도가 되고라야 아니 지 딱시 지구에서 그런 일 바르게 캐플라 딱시 지구에서 그도가 어디 걸라야 아니 this 레시티스 장이스.
And so I'd like to hear from you. And if someone has an idea right now, you can share. Also, if it'd be helpful for you all to have time to talk with your teams, we can do that too. I just think this is another interesting part of the experimental design as to how we would actually do this.
데이터 단단한 속에 딱시 저비하기는 그 자식의 친치차도 수와다 고고파 만라와니 될라야 캐플라야 간다스 딱시 지금 메시지 간다스 요네 데 아니 게데 양테 볼라야 공수 손이 요만나 공수 손은 리두스 야마나 야치소 야 루카나니 트리드치 김바나 트리드치나 리두스.
And this is just meant to be your ideas of how we might do it. There's not one set right answer, and there's a lot of possibilities.
That day ko landi dibare the no was at na yo manis the chetsu ngoni to shit the bag the tap down devi that composition there is dela ya yanko ga detail anat pa ji which place.
When we're ready, let us know what your ideas are for how we could look at the structure or the form of amyloid beta.
ne chizo tatrim bana ne tigang la tanda amyloid beta gi ne ko gi ko pa gi chorwa te ko la ya to se kan do drug gu me te ko la ya ne son roches
again the good
kudo
nganzo roga na de chungso the design de diro tamo nganzo choja do de dandana shinche ane karsa kyabge gi ngol yobaina ane alzheimer ligi yowache ane tengi gi ngol ligi mewachiro tengi gi ngol yona ta de karsa emolo beta de tengi gi ne de yobaina ane karsore tanda alzheimer de yowache tadi choja do ro 당저 당제 제도 somba ane 당보 알제머 여긴긴 ane 나사 여긴지 여러 이게 ane 가서 저추지 린로 아니 저추지리 아니 메겐지기 저추지리 디 ane 가서 마이크로스코프 나로라 디 가서래 아따 아니 디 개발 연매 당저 소자단 딱다 레기 되면도 디 드브데 돈네 페이지 하고 그래 등이다 당도 망스 되지
less we want to test the information that you given me. We want to take that as a hypothesis. Say the amyloid beta that is in the diffuse form is not associated with not associated with Alzheimer's disease, but the plaque form is associated with the Alzheimer's disease, and we want to have samples from a large side of a group who has Alzheimer's disease, who doesn't, and we want to check if that is the case. And from the result, we want to see if that agrees or disagrees our hypothesis.
Yeah, great point about sample size. Yes, we definitely want to make sure that we've got a big enough sample size. Yeah, and if we can hear another idea too, that would be great.
Group Shiba.
nganzo dodor kande chunselana ane tambo dilata chita alzheimer gi natsa diko temba nyamgen gi natsa yendo zambala ane tambo kansa pense ane konzola ane temba nyamgen du munda tambo ane konzola kashila takje chine konzola ane di ane temba nyamgen gi ridila ko ane kalorta chidila temba nyamgen shada mya temba tembo yoaje shemba dila ane temba nyamgen yoaina tinde gi riddiso thangdo du durup chene ane tedala ane karasanata tanda ane tuchigi lamne ane karasana tanda ane konzoge amyloid ane beta deso ane khandi du mudu tamdang thone ane doshina takje chena peje ngozin lela me do samsana jo
we will have a large sample also synthesized from what we will do is we have people who has a memory problem because Alzheimer's disease is related to a memory, and we will have people with the memory problems and people who don't have memory problems, and we will see how that that memory problem is related to the amyloid beta in the system.
Okay. Yeah, and I think this is another good point with the sample size. I like it that we've all got a good sample size in these studies. And yeah, and this one is also a good idea, and then it's connecting up with actually looking at the correlation between sort of this biological marker of amyloid beta and connecting it up with the actual symptoms of Alzheimer's disease being memory loss.
That already toxic outdoors was cheating as me mambola toxic as we pitsig chichong the getchung chapter and yet the light under the capsule hopper to imana and as we and it's chinging it that's when toxic roa chinging it when toxic and that is disagree amyloid beta or what data then as we that data and not saying neta sure netate going by it under the casa and a samig nelatin data tembagi nyamgu or what then check parola ya kogi. I've got
one more slide to share with you all about amyloid beta, and then we are going to move to another topic.
Oh, one question.
Yes, please.
So, if we inject amyloid beta, the plaque form 1, to the primates, do you think they also manifest some sort of symptoms of Alzheimer's disease?
So this is I'll stop sharing for a second. This is a great question. And so I'll say this is really getting at the idea of what we talk about in scientific experiments of causation versus correlation.
That and the Gishila Gatuadigaris and a getting as Sugi, Amloy better the Tranik number you, but the teachers on the day and Atsugi, Turum saw such cannot the Kutsunat the Chuba in Bina, and a Kutsula that a Karsa, a Simon in nature, what the John Tana Diro Asra, or the tea trotted, the length in Bina and the Chitung Shana lay our study, or Trotty our is, and in this Chitung Bina sent Takshinane. Suga twinre ta ani jinjing dewa chorwa oti gi chaya gi yanko talanchi chagyores.
So it sounds like there was sort of already a hypothesis within this question, that maybe the hypothesis would be that if we injected amyloid beta plaques, that there would be an increased risk of Alzheimer's disease in the primate.
Carisana Katie Nasu Emola Beta and a tronic number you, but they need Turum Sochana Jeba and Bana, no Kutsola, ya, and a Simon Nathan Jovi in Yankachichendo race and that is.
So, I don't know. We don't know right now what the actual outcome would be, but we could simplify it and sort of think of two possible outcomes that might happen in this experiment.
That and that was it in the by now called a Tumti Kandarochi, Tongi Bang Igama Hakuma, this in Banangasugi, the Ruchi to buy that Tumti, Mando and Yitongi Bala, Nasugi on to some degrees.
So one of the possibilities would be if we did this experiment, we injected these amyloid beta plaques into the primate, and if they did have increased risk of Alzheimer's disease, that would be suggesting to us that these amyloid beta plaques are really like a strong, important factor that is leading to Alzheimer's disease.
That get that could dramatically getting us to be Turum Sochanatli, amyloid beta than the tronic number you, but they could not chew it by mana. Till attended that they could so la Alzheimer Chonyagi, not Chonyagi, Chinyanka, the chill drove by mana, that take a carritan sena. Any Tandagi amyloid beta tronic number you, but they any assignment not San John is changing on his Chen Chihuahua, Chen Shu Church in by the Tonguris.
It's also possible that we would do this experiment and we would see that there wasn't a difference in Alzheimer's disease. So in that case, we would be thinking maybe there's other factors involved. It's not just this one simple cause.
Okay, they didn't turn which let them they 지바이나 게테 양고 사이먼 네트 마초바이바이나 양아수 가리 터치치트그레스나 데 양고 첸치포 마임바데 마임베기 첸셴달라 땡기요바 어디라도 양아수기 타치트그레스.
It could also be possible if that was the outcome of the experiment that these plaques they're associated with it because it happens afterwards. So maybe they're not causing it, but maybe they actually happen because of a different cause.
야 지체나가 속에 단다 아밀로 베가 디 토닉 나바 예바테로와 마코 티게 스첸 마인 바체로와 나차티 예발라 텐데 디 제라 총위게 연 디브도 텐데도 연 예스바레스.
Yeah. Are there other questions either about this or other questions about anything we've talked about?
도와젬바요스.
No questions.
Okay.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, and we'll have some time later as well.
제라 양아수 도와드는 당에게 appropriate.
All right, so now I wanted to show you the full figure for this amyloid beta plaques, because as you can see, there's this panel in the middle that I didn't show you before.
단다 디캅스 단다 amyloid beta 이토닉 넘버 치고로 되게 아니 이치술라 지금 다 파티 차송하치 된게인스타 단다 디나네 기마 바로 그때 단계 걸려서 된요 말이스.
As with sort of many things in biology, there's not always a really clear-cut answer. Over here, we have the diffuse plaques that are not associated with disease. Here are the plaques that are, and now we also have something in the middle.
단다 디나네 지칭이 생각나네 마음고 찍고 갈수그랬다. 베테 자차 카스무세 보내 양고 제임바드로 시라요 말이스타 단다디 값스타바이 바이나 마수게 에밀로 베타기 지금 남바 마수나 심지로와 다디 나수 잠지금 토르데 주고 남바 요파테 나스디 단도 메파치 이나 토닉게 남바 요파테 나스탄도 요파치 임바나 된이가 바로라요 그 남바 진짜 지거리스.
So I wanted to share this to sort of have the idea that there usually are a lot of sort of more complexities and more just very small, subtle differences that can actually have a biological impact. 농정 차우그랑 신당이나 그 챕터 지어와 챕터 디스 라텐데데 그 슈친테야 지어와 되게 넘버 예바데 니 지금 될라야 무주지스. Because at first when I just said, oh, diffuse is not associated with disease and plaques are, that's making it a little more simple than it actually is. It's missing the whole middle ground in between.
단다디 값스타바이 바이나로가 소게 아니 당보데 아니 그 카탐데 주테 나츠탄 도요 마리스 토닉 넘버 요파데 나츠탄 도요레 시스템 발라야 거기 되게 네탄데 값스페체 하자 다 디우슈즈 조지 모트 지셔지 와스.
And sort of the reason behind why I did that and why it's common in science teaching is that usually we want to get across the main idea, the big picture idea, before we then start to get into all of the sort of exceptions and fine details.
디네로 지금 진생가래서는 아주 새로 없지 값이나 디레디 값스 조디 아니 지금 저든 조지거와 농든 조 가리바티 팔레 모토 지체 엔티 제라야 네 름기 아니 코랑라야 지금 야 캐퍼타 나라야 아니 지금 십차게 접착한다고 지금 데이터 아무도 참고했어.
Here now now you can see that there's actually this whole sort of spectrum of how compact or how diffuse these amyloid beta plaques are.
한다 단다 제주의 amyloid beta 코랑 임바이나 그게 지금 특정 채널과 그 가점 대바당 간다도 지금 양코 첫 담보게 되고 받을 양코게 찹스 만들어요 받을 단도 따지 쪽에 대통 통화당에나 도사레스.
So just as a recap, we've been talking about sleep, and we have been talking about Alzheimer's disease, and we've been talking about how amyloid beta and the glymphatic system are all working together.
나다가 수까지 대시자요레스나 디가서 다 괜찮다 뱀바는 가수가 니다 단다게 가사 제출말라지 단다 델라임로 베다지 아니 데이터 참아 로아 네고수 지가서 그랬다 냠르다 아니 지금 지파 지다 지 템비간이 리카지요 봐 어떤 가수가 니다 참아 지라 지 템비간이 리카지요 봐 가수 다 통사레스.
So I wanted to review that because we're really talking about how kind of all these different parts or different ideas really are all related to each other.
다들 고스터지 중의 진생가는서는 아주 자신만도 하는데 이것을 삼루만도 데이터로 주차만도 데이터 기통에서 아니 판순라야 지금 지금 조요 반디 아니 자기들 안데시아리스.
And now we've got something else to think about, and that is melatonin.
다다 아니 가서 이게 삼루 동안 현대 치료스티가 melatonin.
And so just let's do, because I can see most of you, but quick show of hands, can you raise your hand if this is a familiar term for you?
다 조바 라바 상라지다 melatonin 사이드 시추게 지금 무시하게 조건 임발이 돼서.
Yes, okay, awesome. I think that aligns with what I was expecting.
아니 삼반하시는도스.
And so the main point that I want to say about this, and then we'll talk more in depth, is that melatonin actually is able to prevent amyloid beta from turning into those fibrils or from turning into those plaques.
다다다 티에다 조 남튼 조 데시자프티 제라 야니 코시차테 모토치긴 스타 멜라토닌기 코랑게 젤레도 가르세나 아밀로 베타테 아니 녀마 참모 스고라다 녀마 참모 코판도 녀마 참모 당야나 가수그 당게테요와 자니케 남발라야 네버튼 주라텔링 고쿠요 예스.
So this is where we're really starting to see how all these different things, sleep, amyloid beta, melatonin, they're all influencing each other.
단다디 값이 많아와 단디 값은 아주가 예당 amyloid beta melatonin 데 고수게 단순라야 아니 joyo 바데다 아주 도무도스.
And for me, sometimes when I'm thinking about concepts and they're all related to each other and there's kind of a lot of them, is I like to even just sort of start drawing out a little diagram to show how these are connected. Like, for example, this one, I'd be jotting down, okay, melatonin prevents amyloid beta from turning into the plaques.
다단다 데다 조게 포게 다다 수당 지 접찬데다 망보 지 단순라야 joyo 바로 joyo 바게 네탄데나 고용스 담발라야 나랑 가라도 지고서나 네 remote 데이터 네고수 단순긴 저와토야데 아깝시지스 타피샤샤바나 단단데 melatonin 바네 melatonin 데 가르치게레스나 멜로 베다데 네 녀마 참모게 네고 던지와링 고요레스.
And then you can even start thinking about, okay, how does that relate with sleep, or how does that relate with Alzheimer's?
다티 제라야 네 영군도 가르토나 디그레스나 데 단다게 네 녀탄도 간다도 지요레 나나야 사메르기 네타야 도 간다도 지요레스 로테 토나 디그레스.
All right, so before we talk a little bit more about melatonin in this particular context, most of you or all of you raised your hands saying that you had already heard of melatonin. So for this, we've got another writing prompt. So the question is, what do you know about melatonin? What have you learned so far?
다단다 데 가속에 nikap te la ya ane melatonin gi chali kana do chi yim de ma chi me la ya ane tanda tangi che so melatonin ki system bala ma chi shu mo shingi yesig de shas de bala ya ane chorangi ane ta te melatonin ko shenda chorangi kare shingi yus de ko la jirochis.
So you can take a moment, you can write this down. This is, again, it's related to what you went over in the pedagogy session earlier this summer. And then similar as always, we'll hear from a couple of people so that we can have a little bit of review of melatonin in general before we talk about it in this specific context.
딱 고츠비 값을 sabjung 고츠비 값을 초태 루파게 값을 제출라 지금 답변 때문에 저런 지야게와 단단데 값을 데이터 지금 럭란트에 된다 인스 수 저로치스 진우체라 네 미카시 지게 네 트위터제 고 카렌도 지가 지수 멜라토닌 고 콜라야 나 마마 시주디 또다 텐수 당야 다테 콜라야 차정라 지체 네 되게 제라야 아니 단다기 갑babla야 네 멜라토닌 기 고게 Cheledang Koge, Ligakana Rochi, and the motor chickens.
When you are ready, you can let us know what you know about melatonin.
Tadi bayane chesuge ane chorongi melatonin ko kari singiyo pati motor jerochis.
I think I'm not able to.
Takugudu, that's on the game.
아니 ngachu rukagi ane drudur daw chena ane chidang ane melatonin de ane gondak tujugi chane na ane gondak de ane mangs logo dos gondak de mambo logo dos 아니 지당 멜라토닌 디 팔로 용도 아니 노팅 충분히라 다트네 아니 다 거기 칠레다고 주나로 안 멜라토닌 노 로발라테네 아니 노팅 충분히라 아니 다트네 다 그냥 아니 니쿠에 두두도 레사 된데도 칠레다고 레스위로 되네 잠바
As a teacher, melatonin, the release or the secretion of melatonin starts in the evening or the night time, and it sends signal to the suprachiasmatic nucleus to say that it's time to go to bed.
Maybe some of us are thinking about that right now. What else? Let's hear from at least one more.
Group ngapa?
Ale ngazode tande melatonin la te tande zutin shengin tu karesana thandu me basing dirisha sara ani we yeba ina ani karesana tende gi melatonin loya le kangu chigudus tin du tsamalo ya ni ganda mo logo ti jusen chitin sa tende do isa
So, 100 members tonight.
Pineal gland leisure on the.
Yeah, they say it's at the pineal gland, right? Pineal gland on the member. It's released from the pineal gland. And also, like one we have a brightness or light outside it to prevent release of or secretion of melatonin.
Hey, great. Is there anyone else that wants to share what your group talked about?
Two more response.
Okay, two more. Let's.
Group Shiba.
아니 ngzo ni da gye choma de dan da ani melatonin ma ta kare di de don ryo yore se ji don yo dan da ani khasung gi kola ngzo be na melatonin le de kare re sen lu de zi gang ji dang zi be na ye de zura ena ngzo no ji ni mi gu le ni ku de ge de ni mi gu le de ne ye de so kan di ji na ko ni de le de ke ani gundal sena lo khashi ni ma kye ji melatonin le mo do de kan re se ji yo ngzo zne ji ba ji ko na 답변 연생일 니 아버지는 구도무들 대소 가래 멜라토닌 베드 거바 조더래 간디레즈라 디체다고 가르세죠.
Yeah, we have learned that melatonin is related to sleep, and the light prevent release of melatonin. But in fact, some people just fall asleep even the daytime when it's so bright, and some people has like really difficulty getting to sleep even like it's really dark. I don't. We have a classmate who has like really difficulty to sleep even at night and day, no matter when it is. So during the time, it's like the melatonin release, or the melatonin in his body is just like exhausted, or just what is happening now there? What is happening?
Yeah, well, so this is another good point that it's related to what we talked about earlier, is that so melatonin is one of the factors that affects this, but it's not the only factor. There's many other factors that can influence this as well. So this is similar to what we talked about with amyloid beta, that there could be other factors involved as well.
Tadi karesana ngasu tangi amyloid beta tan tishijaba tan songani danda ngasu melatonin te ni tan dewa pata ni gi ko gita ni kubi kesi kisi simba na ya ni tan do te ni la ya chenchi ni ya tanda melatonin chibu mare sim ko la ya chenchi simba na yores.
I think we had one more. Is that right?
Yes.
Nganso tanda di melatonin tanda le tise khungre le te bayna gunda chise goa tawala ani mombos le yung dis ani tanda chise goba mombo le di chambala yang nganso taba ani khaban ra da tendi chi de na ti wedi gi ani mi da sol phone melatonin ma le ala ani goche shu che yung dis ani tanda melatonin le sa de nganso ani 탕드 수풍래 어디는이마 내용도스.
We think that the melatonin start the melatonin secretion start around 9 p.m. around 9 p.m. in the evening, but when you have like a lot of screen time, when you look at your screen like phone for a long time, when the time it prevent releasing of the melatonin, and they just said it's released from the pineal gland.
Okay, yeah, great. And right, the sun is not the only source of light. So if you're talking about screen time and even other kinds of artificial light, yeah, it definitely can have an effect.
근데 다레스 아주 외 시스템 발라에 외국인 정권이 마치 붙어 많이 받는다 제주게 카플라 타바한테 난 신경 아주 뮤직 외티나 뮤직 다 로라서 바비 mambo요와 어떻게 양 아주 게 텔라신치레스.
So I've got just 2 slides that I've prepared to have a review of melatonin, and then I think we'll just do a little bit of review of this session, and then it'll be time for a tea break.
나한테 단다데라야 다리치샤 주고 쇼럽니 스와테 방체 아니티 콜라탄다 나수카리 지문디 콜라야 티치 퍼사 저정지체 인티기 지랑 아주 소체 퍼센트 against.
And some of this it's sort of a recap of what you've already mentioned, but for melatonin, it's related to this detection of darkness, which we just talked about, and it's there to inform the internal clock of our body.
나한테 다데 치츠세바나 시레 melatonin 세데 아츠게 카스브레타 나콘 샤바탄도요 파탄 아니 나츠 zuponan게 zupu게 나로게 아니 치튼준 콜로치와와 텔레슈친치레스.
So in this picture, it's showing that pineal gland, which we talked about. So melatonin is a hormone that is produced by that pineal gland whenever it's dark. So it's signaling that it's dark.
다단다게 치츠세바나 시레 단다 melatonin 띵아 츠 탕도 멤버고 치리요레스 탕도 멤버 치레티 너쿠고 텐데 같은 것은 치로라야 나콘 차스나 치로 나콘리 도세게 네다티 땡기요레스.
And since it's signaling darkness, this can indicate the length of the night, which is related to seasons, so summer and winter, at least in some parts of the world.
남티기 값에는 생기랑 통들과 가실라야 지게르가 참모 갈수록 통화당 공과 참모랑 하겠네 tante용과 남티 만들어서라 어디기 참모랑 통ting 땡겨레스.
And this is related to one of the graphs that we looked at together yesterday, where we saw that some of the communities in South America and also in Africa, their sleep time varied with the season.
다 대가를 도르스나 계산 아속에 들지탄 요래 단다 아니 소아리다 단다 아프리카나 주고 롬바치라 네코스게 니 구역이 뒤세티 아니 남티도 남티라 튼디탄 주란도 위에 파치탄 예스.
And then just a little bit more about melatonin, and some of this it's reviewing the similar concepts, but they're important for melatonin, is that we've already mentioned it's released at night, but that light would be suppressing the release. And so this is why, for example, the screens are important when we're discussing this.
한다다데 저쪽 차기에서 한다 데이터 디나네 멜라 용 개첨부 그네 좀 개첨부 같이 요래 스타트 그 제목 거라 데지치그레 데지치는 미체 로그요래 임바네 여기 그 알론도체 데카크레스 데카프시 영화 속에 지 카프라드네도 멜라드네도 따창이들 시청부터 바이나 되게 용 고도지 지기요 봐 되게 신지기요 바데 영이고레스.
And then this second point here is related to what came up before. So it's produced in the pineal gland, but it is providing feedback to the suprachiasmatic nucleus to provide information about the time of day.
로야 데이터 단단가 속에 당도 멤버나 로그에 심바이나 가서 그 가르치고래서나 아니 단다게다 맞속에 데라 레팔라와 단단가 노통 전부라야 아니 지금 님마 지금 뒤속아서 참으리샤 쇼바리샤서 딱 참으리샤 님머리샤 세기 네탄테 고양 거래 고르지요레스.
And so this is related to regulation of seasonal breeding in animals and facilitates sleep, as we've already been talking about.
that 때문에 제가 안에 되게 섬치신다고 나라 고 가서그래다 지금 고소게다 이제 배야다 때 안에 남지 당도 바텔라 당지 지내면서 안에 고게 아니 커요 진주지레스.
It is known to promote some repair and healing. And this point is on here, and it's kind of the last one because this will be really related to what we'll talk about in our second session after the tea break.
다 담아들어야 가지고 repair and healing like 아주 주주제 당신들 지 수주제게 competence 대야 내 담아대셔야 될 거라나 단다대 그냥 가지고 초던 지만아 지역에 주시 당료예스.
Yeah, so after our break, we will take some time to actually talk a little bit more about Alzheimer's disease itself. And this will be it'll be good to use the foundation that we've been talking about with amyloid beta and sleep and melatonin to inform what we actually talk about with Alzheimer's disease.
that 초던 지마 값은 아주게 뛰어와 Alzheimer 네콜라야 네 아무도 지기엔스 다단다 데 마치면라 야치탄 이만은 아주게 물로 배터리 니레 멜라토닌 다 데이터 기 지만지기 지샤단 고추기 젤레데 하고 임바나 네 데이터라 텐데 데 아주 사미 네기 코티 네 도야라 팽기죠 네 단다게 좀 진들랑 아주 동으로 지바인스.
So we have talked about several different ideas so far in this session. So we're going to do something similar to what we did at the end of the day yesterday, and that is the golden nugget exercise. So you can just sort of think back, reflect, what do you think is the one most important key piece of information that you really want to make sure you remember? And so you can think about this and you can even jot it down if you want to.
다 계산 아주 지원한 시대 다다시 속에 단단 아주 넘치나 최백이다 지금 더주만 망보 중으로 지어로 대나네 아니 지금 지랑 지금 대주 삼로나한테 지다 단 디다 템바나한테 니에데긴 세게 네트 지어 바이나 네트 지데 가리 이메데 수수 삼로당한테 수수 지데 바 지나디게스.
So you can just take a few minutes to do that, and then we will have just a few people share before we go for a tea break.
그만 가시지나 들으러 제스 주누이체라네 미 카티라야티 가리 이멘트 모토체 코케 프로인스 아니 되게 제랑 아주 소치 퍼센타인스.
Hello, Gendawa.
sonda.
Danda di thandu membu gi ani melatonin pewala tene ani nganzu leva gi ani zubo gi chuzu kasa da ngima gi chuzu de ha gugure la ro. Ta namgyu ngarang chu gi chuzu jikta che ani ta leva la da da nganzu ngeshi ke je ro. Ta namgyu ngarang chu gi da mi gi chuzu koranta che ani da ngima gi jogo re nyungu re gonda re di ha go che ro. Diki legace wa diki tanda di melatonin tanda gidon chen legace jero chuzugi di gochugur chugumaris.
Teka te tuare la chorong golden nugget re.
Tuare gen gochugure chugi. Amgyu ngado lagwa ge chuzuta ne dang imagi hagugorwa.
Ande hagos teka hagos ngi to hagos. He has a question. Do you want to take that?
Sure, yeah. This can be both golden nuggets and questions.
Okay, his question is we one because of the melatonin is because of feeding back to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It tells us about the time of the day or time of the night or like what day or night it is. So for in our day-to-day life, we just look at our watch and tell us what time of the day it is. So does that like comparable with each other, or can one thing just replace the other? So it tell us actually in our brain, it tell us what time of the day it is.
Yeah, okay, this is a fun question. So I think maybe the first thing that came to mind is, so for my graduate work, I worked in a fruit fly lab, and I will just say my fruit flies did not have watches. And the rooms that we kept them in, we made sure that we had a timer for light and dark so that they could stay within their normal circadian rhythms. So I think if we're thinking about this broadly for all the other animals that are not us, they're not going to have watches. But, or yeah, we'll say that and then I'll keep going.
Tatananga Shinjiloma Chiwi Tosichiwaka Simbana, Giaticalisana, and the Masu fruit flies or Nasushinto Gontalim Bujim Water, Tigri, Natosichi Bains. Ani take up Simbana Kusula, that Tiomar Wakarsa, any Kusula, and it's so Tasati Yomarwa, Himbana Ya, Kusudan the Tosichi Satella Ya, any Nasugitach Tuchikaya Kayoris, Timse, and Nikolaya. Nyentang Tsengi ko ti or wakarsa china ponchopana na ponchai monsu to bugine tanchi orate which go tina shinge semchin shenda mabota baimbana yon kola nechi chota de ton lente achuro ne tante yomares.
And then just for humans, I think we could also think about, right, when you're flying back and forth between India and the US, at least for me, it usually doesn't work if I just look at the time and say, oh, it's not a time to be tired. But there maybe could be some effect. It could be interesting to see if maybe there's even a small effect.
The chichina kola ya karsabria. Yang asuge the chulati data aladim bana tandong orisha kalika which the nochi marisha samak the yongorwa yongorista. And that instambla tamlaya tela ne shuchin chonchon at the yongres.
Yeah, it's a fun question. Let's see, I think it looks like we've got a minute, so maybe we can hear just from one more. So it could be, there's a final question, or also we've got a golden nugget.
단단히 긴 나와라. 단단히 온산 냥바도 단단히 나자 timba 냥데 나자데 티니 단단 니 몽보 콩에 대해서라 대해서 나자디 모용한기 페노든디 요레스 가인스나 단다 아니 에몰리아 비탈라에 조 단다디 니 쿠이고스 몽볼레 용다 티고스 단다디 심바디기 가르사 말레리아세 티기 고강고체 댕다 고 뉴마타미네고스 강고 슈체ing다 제자 고 니 몽보 쿠시나 아니 고 뉴마타비 단다 냐마타미 참물 마차야라 강고 쩨르디 잠발라 데사네 니 나자드 말레알 디 핑도든디 요레스.
Yeah, his question is about longer duration of sleep and lower risk of the disease, Alzheimer's disease or neurodegeneration. Because when you talk about all the mechanisms, when you sleep longer, melatonin, a lot of melatonin is released, and that prevent the amyloid beta turning into fibrils. And when we think about all this relationship between them, and there's like longer duration of sleep, this sort of disease. That's another question.
Okay, I guess maybe I'm not into, I don't know what exactly is the question.
Does longer duration of sleep prevent risk of Alzheimer's disease?
Okay. So I think first I'll just say that sounds like that was a great recap of our whole session.
Yeah.
So that I think for right now, I'm not going to actually directly answer that question, because I will say that question that's pretty much the theme of our whole next session.
Tanda toa tena lendegi means karchila vaina tanda toa degi ani chode karsena nga so something jima triage goro chumto jima kasa triagi lhamsingi ta nonten todo de reshas.
Yeah, so I think that's a great way to go for our tea break. And yes, we are